I want to congratulate you and We the World on the 20th anniversary of 11 days of global unity. Together, you, me, and we can create a better world and have fun doing it.
Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit, celebrating the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. My name is Jana Larsen, and I am the Human Resources Director and the coordinator of the Economic Justice Campaign of We the World, and as well as many other things for We the World. Today, on our 11 Days Summit panel, I'm excited that we will hear from Mitzy Clementina, who will be talking about economic justice. For the full 11 day schedule, you can register for free by going to 11daysofglobalunity.org. And 11 is a numeral, so it's 11daysofglobalunity.org. And you can see replays of the recordings. You can also make a contribution to support We the World by going to we.net, and we thank you. Now, let's bring in my co-host, Rick Ulfik. Rick Ulfik is the founder of We the World at we.net and the co-creator of 11 Days of Global Unity. Welcome to the broadcast, Rick Ulfik.
Thank you, Jana. And thank you all so much for joining us. Welcome to the annual 11 Days of Global Unity Summit, featuring visionary leaders and activists working for people and the planet and a world that works for all. Our summit panels on each of the 11 summit themes range from unity to environment to human rights, freedom, and peace. I and we are deeply grateful that you are helping us to celebrate the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. I want to also acknowledge some of our amazing partners who we support and collaborate with during 11 Days of Global Unity and all year round. The UN International Day of Peace NGO Committee, the UN Summit of the Future, the Unite for Peace Coalition, which includes Unity Earth, the Sign Network, One World, the Awakening World, We the World, Climate Week, the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence at Cathedral St. John the Divine, Pause the World in Times Square, and Pace e Bene, I'll say it again, and Pace e Bene Nonviolence Campaign and March. What an amazing movement representing literally millions of people working to achieve global unity, all working with We the World and the We campaign at we.net. Before we hear from Mitzy Clementina, in the context of economic justice being the theme of today's 11 Days Summit panel, I would like to give a quick overview of the consequences of massive rising inequality in our society. And maybe Mitzy can comment on this as well. Economist Richard Wolff is the founder of Democracy at Work and the host of Economic Update. He recently shared a decades-long exhaustive study by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett in the UK. It shows that the more a society is unequal, the more essential aspects of society are damaged as a result. For example, the climate crisis is worsened by inequality. There is more air pollution, there are more carbon emissions, there is less recycling, there is also less social cohesion in societies with huge inequality. People distrust their institutions more, they distrust the government more, and there is more hostility between between ethnic groups and between genders. And there is less social mobility. People's health and well-being is worse, with more addictive drug use, more mental health problems, and shorter life expectancy in societies. The bigger the gap between rich and poor. I think this warrants separate a separate program and maybe a major forum to discuss this, especially since we hardly ever hear politicians talking about it. So, what do you think, Jana? You have been a leader of our economic justice campaign, and you've worked with the Poor People's Campaign. You think it might be good to do a forum like this?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, um, so let's hear from our guest speaker, Mitzy Clementina. Jana?
Would you like me to do an introduction first?
Yes, I think that would be great.
Okay, you ready, Mitzi? Mitzy Clementina is an initiated medicine carrier of her Andean tradition, focusing on ancestral practices and cosmovision for healing and reconnecting with our true selves. She holds a degree in organizational behavior and management and co founded Humanize, a platform that uses data for social change. Additionally, she works with mission based organizations supporting ancestral communities in Latin America to secure legal rights and protect land. But I could actually go on for a lot longer introducing Mitzi. However, we will bring her on now and let her talk about what she does
Yes.
and what
So we
drives
we are
her.
yeah, and I and we are looking forward to hearing about the work you're doing. And welcome to the broadcast, Mitzy Clementina.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Jana, for the wonderful introduction. It's a real big pleasure to be here. I think when I think about the economic justice, it's such a big topic, and it covers so many layers of things. And I think that's where we are at as a society, as a human species, is how do we move forward, within that. When I think about my general upbringing and what's led me to this space, there's been so many factors that I think, both you, Rick, and Jana were talking about. Growing up with dual nationality, dual citizenship between here and Bolivia, that I never really felt like I belonged in any one world, right? So living here in the U.S., to my Bolivian and Peruvian relatives, I was American. And to my friends and to the people here, I wasn't necessarily American. So always living within like the space in between two realms of that gap. And also just spiritually speaking, the aspect of spirituality has been a very big important part of my life. Certainly, my father made sure that I remembered the ancestry that I came from. But from a spiritual perspective, my family was involved in a religious organization that had prophecies of their own, prophecies that were talking about, they were apocalyptic, talking that we were living in the last days and that we needed to live our life a certain way. But I was also infused with the prophecy of the eagle and the condor that talked about a different ideology, that the same urgency that of where our society was headed, but their prophecy was a little bit different. It was about a more hopeful future. Whereas the apocalyptic prophecy was about a little more doom and gloom. The hope is later. Whereas some of the prophecies of even the seventh fire and the tobacco and the pavement prophecies that are also circulating around all talk about like what can we do now, right? What is laid before us as a human species. And I think that's really where I really began to see some of the differences that I had as maybe strengths, because I was always really living with two different ideologies, both religiously and then spiritually and then nationally and culturally. I really began to pay more attention to that gap in the middle. I really enjoyed being in spaces where I didn't understand what was going on, but I was able to glean the different cultural values that are important to each group. Even as a translator, speaking Spanish also has a great lesson in there too, because as I spoke Spanish in some spiritual spaces where I was translating, I had to be very thoughtful that one word in one language in one country has one meaning, but that same word in a different country, also Spanish speaking, actually is a very charged word and not conducive towards peacemaking or fellowship. So, even just those things, and even the things that I studied in college and at the University of San Francisco, I studied organizational behavior. The concepts I was introduced to was about unconscious bias and groupthink. These are ideas that were introduced to me before they became like very popular. But I say all of this because I think all of this has really been a pivotal part of all of the work that I have chosen to belong to. I belong to several different organizations and I carry on very specific projects just because of the different host of skill sets that I have. And that does put me in a situation where I can choose what kind of projects I feel like I could be the most advantageous. But I say all of this because this is like where we are as a species, right? I think we all understand inherently like where we need to go. We have so much information, we have so much evidence that is telling us where we are. And we also have the data that is telling us, where that disparity is leading us to. Rick, you were really great about sharing just what that really means for us as a society. And so a lot of the work that we have as a society to move forward is really in between these two goalposts of what seems like an extreme ideology, like what is there, in the middle, and how can that be shifted? And there isn't really one answer to that, because to say that there is one answer is part of the problem, right? We can't really pick one solution and then attempt to scale it. This is the mindset that I think we're trying to move away from, because every nation, every indigenous people is very, very different. I have to call to attention what's happening right now in Bolivia that's not even being covered by the news. Between Bolivia and Brazil, there are massive fires just devastating the Amazon and devastating the Chiquitania forest, which is a part of Bolivia. And I think even just that situation that's happening can give us so much information about the aspect of economic injustice and justice and economic justice. Because you have a lot of territories, indigenous groups that are being largely affected by this, but you have other parts where you have indigenous communities who have been able to safeguard their community, right? So Bolivia, for years now has had their lands recognized, but the gap that they are living in is between the legal recognition of the rights of the indigenous people to have their land and the enforcement of said rights, right? So what a big gap there is in that, and what's happening in the Amazon and in the Peruvian area is a perfect example of that, because the areas that the indigenous communities have been able to secure and to have not only the legal recognition, but the enforcement of that, those lands have not been affected by the devastating forest fires that are ravaging through that area as we speak. Other areas that belong to indigenous communities where they have still been struggling to maintain, to have those rights be recognized, are now being devastated. And I think we all know what the impact of the Amazon is to not just South America, not just to us here in the global north, but to the entirety of the planet. We know what's at stake. And there is an economic aspect to it as well. You know, when we ask our indigenous communities to flourish or to give them their land, we're asking them to be stewards of the land, which is their purpose. This is what has been guiding them all along. When we don't follow along, when we don't follow through on what some of those promises are, we run into the gap areas of where we are, right? That nebulous area of like, how do we move things forward? And the impact is economic, not just to the indigenous communities there who now do not have a way to, you know, and some don't have a home anymore, but they don't no longer have a way to feed their families and their communities. Like, that is the extreme form of, you know, economic injustice, because economic injustice is not just about money, right? It's about, for a lot of communities, indigenous and at large, for a lot of communities, that economic stability comes from land. Oh,
That
Jana, I
makes
think you're
sense.
muted.
Sorry, I was
Yes.
I was worried about my dog barking, but
Shall we
it
shall
must
we
be
move
some,
into like a
yeah,
round
let's move
table kind
into
of
it.
thing? Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. So,
Okay.
you must be feeling very heartbroken with what's going on, and just heartbroken for all the populations everywhere that are going through not the same thing, but the same idea of they can't the land is theirs, but they can't have it, and they can't be they aren't being protected, and so they're being having to move, and they have to go somewhere. I mean, but then no, it, it's so frustrating. I can't even put it into words. My frustration with how it is and how people can't see the problem, and the just deplorable reaction of people who are fighting against just human dignity. And I could go into another situation that I don't know if it's all right for me to talk about, but it was happening in Springfield, Ohio, right
Mm.
now. I mean, I think that is part of it. People, you know, and these people were invited to Springfield, Ohio, Haitians, and then because of just very callous remarks and a movement against people for ridiculous reasons to create, now there is unsafety where they're living right in my own state. Um, they're having to close the schools because gun violence, threats of gun violence. It's just, it's everywhere. It's not some obscure idea that there are transgressions against people anywhere that can't have access to their land for ridiculous reasons. It's help me out here. I can't even complete my thought.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to add in that, we're living in a time where there's so much, right, that is not going right. But I think also it's an important time to acknowledge, what is going right. Over the last few weeks, the metaphor of the weaving basket has been brought up both in some of the talk circles that I belong to and in other conversations, and how, there's the three layer. That first layer has to be the foundation. That second layer of that basket can be it's a little messy because you're trying to maneuver two things, and that third layer that comes on really puts everything together. And so that second layer has to be a little messy, or it tends to be a little messy. And maybe that's really where we are as a society, as we're moving forward with, what needs to be fixed and what needs to be addressed. Knowing that maybe we can celebrate the win that first foundation has already been set, right? So, like I said, the existence of even 11 Days of Global Unity and other projects that are efforted through your amazing work are all signifiers of that conversations are being had. People are listening, and I think the space that we are in now is like this aspect of moving forward. When I think about the prophecy of the seventh fire from the Anishinaabe, they spoke of the seventh fire being a time where there would be that reclamation, right? Where we would go, where there would be a new species of people stepping forward to reclaim the ancestry. And I see so much of that. I see so much of that in some of the UN events that I go to, where I see a lot of young Indigenous people who have been sent by their community to get educated in economic justice or in law, and then use that to empower their communities, right? So I think by and large, one of the things that I really want to focus on is how so many Indigenous communities are already empowered. And that this next step, going back to the seventh fire prophecy, it talks about that even though they would be reclaiming and healing themselves, that they would not be ready to walk forward. And in this year, I had the great honor to attend the Union of the Condor, Hummingbird, Quetzal, and Eagle Summit that happened in Palenque, and they had already started the burning of the eighth fire. The eighth fire is that next step. That fire is this unity of us walking now forward together, right? So when we walk forward together, it's a new terrain. It comes with new interesting things, but also new issues that we have to navigate, right? So maybe we're living in a time where, yes, certainly there's the issues that we are seeing are becoming more glaring, but the solutions and the people who are stepping forward to do it are also becoming more evident. And there is something really beautiful in that when we think about the weaving of what needs to happen, because this is that next step. And there's so many things that we need to answer for ourselves. It happens at the individual level, right? To ask ourselves when we go into these spaces to help, like, are we making sure that we're paying attention to the cultural norms of that group that we belong to? Are we making sure that we don't stand and believe that only our way is the right way, and that we're bringing that ideology into it, right? And for much of the Indigenous communities, some of this for them has to do with, can I let go of the anger and the bitterness that has happened to my ancestors and be more open to these collaborations that are coming, right? So there is work on both sides that needs to happen. But what I see is that both sides are stepping up to do this. And I think from that perspective, it is really beautiful that we have this meeting and this celebration, this acknowledgement that while there might be some issues, we're still moving forward, like that second layer of the weaving basket that just can't be cleaned, not until that final layer gets imposed. But we do it together. And I think that's the important part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good way to say it. Don't you agree, Rick, that I mean, there's just like the weaving basket, when you're looking at the physical aspect of trying to create a good foundation. It gets messy until it comes together. It's the same with emotions, like there's a place to be passionate and, angry, and there's a reason to and a time to be calm and reflective and tranquil, and there's a time you have to put it all together, can't you? Because you can't just feel one thing about anything. We're human beings. We have a lot of emotions, and it's so if you're angry and feel like it's really unfair for how things are, use that passion, that emotion to get involved, and then see how you can put your energies towards making it better. And yes, it it can appear overwhelming, just like anything can appear overwhelming. Learning how to tie your shoes can be overwhelming, but then once you know how to tie your shoes, it's like, why did I ever think that was hard? It's a piece of cake, So you have time to go on and deal with complex emotions and see how just takes one little step, and one little step leads to another step, and maybe it encourages other people to, oh, and maybe she took a step, maybe I can take a step, and then pretty soon others are joining in taking the step, and then they can feel good about it. And that's what I think Jane Goodall talks about when he had his interview with her, and it it must be a good way to be, because she's at 90 years old and she does. I mean, there's something innate and that is preventing from all the bad influences to take away her inner joy and her inner spirit and her inner, whatever that is, to keep going. And what an amazing energy, spirit to that we could all take. Even a part of it would make such a huge difference. And that's, I mean, when I first found out about Rick and Read the World, I don't even remember exactly what he said, but I remember there was an energy that I felt that made me think, yes, I want to join in, even though I get frustrated sometimes and overwhelmed. We're, we're still a family, and we're gathering more people like you. I sure hope you all want to join together, because certainly there's such a common spirit going through here. Threads, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. So thank you, Jana. And Mitzi, I was struck by what you were talking about, the uh, the the indigenous groups coming together from different uh, points of view, basically. Uh, so that is a great example of this movement towards global unity, right? That's what we're talking about all the time with this 11 days. And I was just wondering if you would be able to go into more detail about the philosophies, um, the spiritual uh, tenets, or of the different groups that are coming together. What are the differences that you see? You mentioned the condor, the quetzal, and the other ones. Um,
The hummingbird.
The hummingbird, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah,
So, what
yeah,
are those qualities? Uh, I'm just not up on those things
yeah,
in
yeah.
detail. It
Well,
would be nice to hear, and then how those differences are being talked about and resolved to come together in a way that allows them to think as one alliance, or one kind of bird that's flying
yeah,
forward,
yeah.
or
One
something like
flock
that.
flying forward, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this event in Palenque, which was called the Condor Hummingbird Quetzal, the union of the Condor Hummingbird Quetzal and Eagle. It's a mouthful. But it represents, in South America, and there is like a representation of each group based on like on an animal. There's even like the jaguar people, the anaconda people. And the condor is the general South American Andean community. That's kind of where I am. And people like me represent the condor and the eagle, because I also have my nationality based in the U.S., and the eagle is represented by the wisdom and the geography of Turtle Island, the global north. Um, the hummingbird is more of that upper South American area, and then the quetzal is the Central America area, and each one have their own medicine about how they approach things. Going to these sort of conferences, is becoming more and more something that is happening, because they're being called by prophecy. They're called by the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, and then each community sends a delegate of their community to represent them, to meet with other indigenous leaders of other communities in South America. And this is, I want to lay this on the foundation of something I said earlier before about how we're living really in a new time where, when we look at our indigenous communities, they really aren't as marginalized as we once thought they were. I think there's a lot of groups that exist now that still wish that they were, because it would make it easier for them to impose their solutions, that are not really rooted in what is best for these communities. These type of gatherings are bringing together the actual leaders of the lands of the people that are there, so that they can actually have a conversation. There's a ton of allies that are there as well, but the ones leading it are these indigenous communities and the leaders of it, so that they can begin to have these conversations, so that outside parties are no longer the ones trying to bring solutions into play. And kind of like what you were saying, like each new achievement also begins to bring issues and things that we begin to see that we have to massage and work our way through. And coming in like as a translator who translates for a variety of different communities with different belief systems, but also speaking the English language and also being able to hear the conversations that are formal and informal. I can say how much comes down to really just having that open communication, right? That communication that doesn't come from an agendaed place or an ego place or a hurt place. And some of the rules that are laid out have to do precisely with that. It's not that, because on our travel to peace and unity, we can't expect that to be free of conflict or of discussion or of accidentally offending somebody. As a matter of fact, it has to be paved with that. We have to look at that as a useful tool, something constructive, something beneficial, because the lack of conversation is where our society has been up until now, and that hasn't gotten us anywhere, right? So the conversations are so necessary, the disruptions are so necessary, the discomfort is so necessary. And sometimes there are delicate issues that I have to bring up, or I have to be maybe the voice of maybe like a little bit of a disciplinarian person that says, no, you can't do that. That's like a violation of their spiritual thing. And I'm sorry that I'm yelling at you now, but I am preventing there being some discomfort. But what I have noticed is that a lot of indigenous communities do share certain values about certain things. For instance, if you make an offense or do something, they will still receive you, but you may never know that this is not a relationship that's going to move forward because of just certain missteps, right, in understanding the cultural nature of things. A lot of indigenous communities still practice that when you go to a spiritual leader's home, like you want to make sure you're bringing some kind of meaningful gift, right? And it's not something that is a high in economic value, but more of like high in a cultural value, right? So when I first went to go visit some of my teachers in Peru, the very first thing I brought was like a big bag of coca leaves, and that was my way of honoring them and bringing something there. In other spaces, if I didn't know to bring that, they would still receive me, but they would never say yes to being my teacher because I was not paying attention enough to the things that were important to that cultural space. So those are just little like minor things that I think that when so many groups come together, they are looking for what's being respected. And in some of these spaces, they're really encouraged to speak up a little more forcefully than before to make sure that their voices are being heard. And sometimes my role is to make sure that, a voice that is not heard has to be heard, coming in and saying, hey, something needs to be said. Can we get everyone's attention? And I feel really lucky to be able to do that. But because it's in these spaces where there are so many languages and I'm dominating two, I think it really helps me be a little bit of a conduit, so to speak, to make sure that the voices, those that are living in that gap, kind of like how I felt like I was in that gray area. I know what that gray area looks like. I know how valuable that gray area is. And, there's so much of what's said and not said that falls into that gray area. And sometimes my responsibility when I'm sitting with a lot of really amazing elders who are leaders of their community, sometimes my only function is to make sure that certain voices are heard within the paradigm of that, and I think that's like a really special place.
How did you get to that position where um, you knew that you were doing things the right way and that they respected your way of coming in because you respected their way? Was it a long and hard battle, or I shouldn't say battle? Was it a hard and long process, or or was it something that you saw quickly, or because like when you go into a strange area, there's just so much stimulation. It takes a long time to figure out just exactly what you're seeing. But then as you become educated or take time to look and make organize your visions into some sort of understanding, it can take a lot of time. And then once you look back, you think, wow, why didn't I see that before? Because it's right there in front of me. uh, what was the process like for you?
I think, for me, I just, got invited back. That was how I first, like, oh, that's funny. They invited me out of everybody else to come back. okay, not really thinking of
Must be
it.
cool.
Yeah, all right, cool. I guess I'll come. Like, oh, you weren't invited? I'll go, well, I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, but I think, for me, like I said, I've always really paid attention to like the outliers and what's there. I'll never forget, we went down, it was like this medicine trip to deep in the Amazon from the territory of the Sekopai, who in November 2023 were finally got like a court recognition, legal recognition of these lands being theirs. And we were part of this group to go to this remote part of the Amazon to do ceremony. That was one of the criteria that the government had said, like, you need to do ceremony here. At least this many times through the calendar year, so that to fulfill the criteria, so you can have this land claimed as yours. And the decades-long battle of the Sekopai, where we're down this boat ride, a 10-hour boat ride down into the Amazon. And I was with a lot of English speaking people, but I was also there with Spanish speaking people. And I was there to be in support. Like I was a support member for this retreat. And I'll never forget when we get there, you could really clearly see the difference between the two communities, right? So the Sekopai, who had been there who had been there numerous times, this came in and they were walking barefoot all through this area. And for those who were traveling there from not from the area, who were there to do the medicine, came in with like these boots that went like way above your knees to help them from getting eaten by the fire ants. The fire ants were having a feast. Let's just but the Sekopai were walking barefoot. And I remember noticing that and thinking, how interesting. Like they just know this land, and this is what it's like for them to know their land, and we not knowing their land, we don't even know where to step, right? And of course, after 2 days, everybody who had the boots on just ravaged, bitten by all the ants. But those
Wow.
who were walking barefoot didn't have very many ant bites. So by day two, I was like, you know what? I can't have any more bites. Like, I mean, I can't have any more bites than what I already have. So I decided to take off
Might
the
as
boots.
well just get bitten.
I took off my boots and I started walking around barefoot. They noticed that I was one of the first people to do that. And then I started hanging out with them more because I was also translating, even though their language is different. Like there was a few who were Spanish speakers, and so we were able to do that. And I was joking with them about it too, like, look how funny, what a beautiful lesson this is right here, where we walk in with these boots, these protection, right? And we're getting eaten up, and I don't see you guys having any bites anymore. And they're like, well, have you gotten bitten anymore? I'm like, I haven't gotten bitten anymore. Because after a few
Wow.
days of walking the land, I too became accustomed to where to step, right? Knowing that the ants that were there, this is their land. We're walking on their land, right? So, I think it's little experiences like that where I'm just, I really felt like I'm always noticing, I'm always like to read the room and read the cultural room, like of where I am, and understand what's culturally important to them, and to try to respect that wherever possible. And I think that that's really important because I wasn't in my own home. I wasn't even in my own home country. I was in a very different terrain, and I knew that the rules could be very, very different. And it was
Yes.
at the end of that trip, the spiritual leader of that group, Don Basilio, I'll never forget, pulled me aside and he said, I would love it if you came back. And that was just one of
That's
many,
great.
situations. But it usually kind of happens like that, like I'm there just to help out. I'm so excited to be there, to take this medicine, and to have been a part, a very small part, mind you, of the Sekopai reclaiming this land. And that contested land was the land that we were on, doing this ceremony. So I think there's like an evolution of the little things like that, and just general awareness of where I see things. Again, coming from the perspective of a child who didn't necessarily feel like she belonged anywhere, and as a result became an observer, just observing the different cultural values of different areas so that I could adapt, right? So like, okay, I'm in Bolivia. Okay, US rules out the window, South American in place, right? So I think it's just the ability to adjust in that way, even early on, but also just to admire it, right? Obviously, I'm very passionate about it. I went to school and I studied it, change management, understanding like what are our natural biases? Why do we believe what we do? And why, as a group, do we believe what we do? Why is it that even in the face of the right answer, we still go the wrong direction, right? So I was always really inspired by questions like that, not really trying to issue blame, but trying to understand that, we as humans have so many gifts, but sometimes those gifts not wielded correctly take us down this road of groupthink where we are going down the wrong path because we just don't even realize it, because we didn't stop to read the situation or to understand what was really going on around us, or to take those moments of pause to say, hey, am I on the right track, as opposed to I'm just going to keep numbing myself and going down this way because it's the only way that I know.
So
That's
I'm
amazing.
wondering, yeah, I was kind of wondering how it works to have these four groups, or maybe it's more than four, but at least four groups make decisions about how to share the land. Because if the land is being contested, that's between the indigenous group or groups and the government, correct? But
Yes.
what about between, in other words, are the groups, indigenous groups, um, coming together to agree on the land and then having a stronger showing when um, dealing with the government? Is that how it's working?
Yeah, well, there's different topics, different topics and different situations. If we're speaking specifically about what happened in Palenque, it was about gathering different communities from South America and indigenous communities from North America to just
Yeah,
begin to have a conference, right? Of like, okay, hey, what's working for you, and what are the issues affecting you, and what are the issues affecting us, and it was almost like planting the seeds for future
I
gatherings,
see.
events. And from there, like many small groups began to emerge with similar missions or similar goals, right? So, but the purpose of those gatherings are really to come together to really understand what are the issues affecting the indigenous communities at large in the north and in the south, in Turtle Island and in the Abiyala area, right? So, but I can say that that doesn't mean that there aren't really disputes in between indigenous communities when it comes to land, because when we really think about it, like how far back can we really go to say whose land belonged to who?
Exactly.
If one community was completely desolated and killed off, and then another community came, whose land does it really belong to? I do know, and I can't speak too deeply into this, but I do know, like when it came to the Secopai, some of their land actually belonged in what was recognized as country of Peru outside of Ecuador. And so some of their challenges became having to negotiate, but the layer before negotiate was having to have a fight, have a fight with some of the Peruvian indigenous communities who felt like that land was theirs, right? So, and how do they resolve that conflict? There's a variety of different ways, but I know that in some situations they sit and they do medicine together. They sit,
Mm,
have their traditional medicines that they do with one another, and in a lot of cases, that's why that medicine, was created as a way to conference with spirit. At least for me and my ancestors, doing ayahuasca was like something that the spiritual leaders of the community did to get some guidance for the future. Um, and that was how they had these conferences, whereas we have this summit on Zoom, like their summit was like with the medicine, with the mother medicine, ayahuasca. And so sometimes they'll have, conferences based on that. But something else that I think needs to be acknowledged is that these things take time, and I think
Mhm.
for me, being somebody who received the majority of my education here in the US and even went to university here, and I was a project manager for a long time, and all of my activism work and advocacy work had to do with getting things done, right? So I remember even like having that tagline when I was promoting myself to get certain jobs. It's like, if you have a project, I have like a 100% track record of getting something completed, right? And
I have
that's
a plan for that.
yeah.
a fantastic metric.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, I have a plan for that.
Yeah, but that's a fantastic metric and a fantastic ideal to have here in the North.
Hmm.
But it's not very useful when you're trying to push something towards a solution and that is your primary focus, when you're not paying attention to
Right.
Indigenous communities need to go back and speak to their members. They're sitting with the land, they're sitting with their medicine, and sometimes this takes a little while, right? And this goes to something that, Jana, you were saying earlier, how like people might say like, well, you're poor because you're lazy, right? It takes us into these labels. And I think it does speak a little bit to just some of the frustrations that are actual misunderstandings of a misapprehension of what's really going on. The misapprehension being that this is how they conference, this is how they make decisions. Here, from my perspective, my training comes from like, look at the numbers, look at the date, pick a date, but that date's not rooted in anything, whereas for certain indigenous communities, they have their own calendars and there's certain days you just don't do that. There's certain seasons where you just,
Right. Yeah.
and that's something that's really powerful.
Because time is a social construct anyway. Like if you say, well, let's get together at lunchtime. Well, what's lunchtime? When is lunchtime? What's when you eat lunch? But that could be a different time and a different format and everything. And so that's what I love about studying different cultures and people is, the sociological perspective, but then you also have to look at that being the study of the person in the community and the effect of the community on the person. But if you think of psychosociology, then you're thinking of that whole perspective of what causes personality, and then how does that affect the community or the community affects that. So it gets all very complicated. Basically, it's just a matter of just like communication. Hi, hi, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? And then you just get to know, and then eventually you find out, well, someone that grew up in New York City has had a very different background than someone like me, who grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and I can live in the mountains. I know how to fish. I know how to do all kinds. I know how to live in a teepee. But if you take me to New York City, I'm going to be. I don't know. I don't know how to work the subway. I don't know how to work anything in the city, and I'm just scared. So that's what it is. So it's what we're talking about. It's different perspectives and different ways of looking at things, and in the end, talking about what is economic justice and and or the lack thereof, as we were talking about, that are in so many communities.
So, Mitzi, what would be your like your message to people who are uh, watching this? I could call it a call to action, or what what would uh, what would you like to con- to convey to people that could help get things moving in the direction that of more like global unity, um, and um, towards economic justice,
Or
really.
you're a young person who, you just feel like you don't belong in any one group. You feel like you're an outlier, whether you are or not because of economic background, but you just see things differently, and because I think knowing more as we do now, just because we have Zoom and television and all those sorts of ways to know about others cultures, what could you say to a young person who's trying to decipher the world and wants to make a difference, and how would that person go about that? What
Yeah.
an inspirational message.
Yeah, I think, we're living in such an important time. And I think that the biggest thing that I can convey is that we are living in a time where all of the energies, the spirit, and all of the energies of the indigenous people are asking us all to move forward together, right? And that moving forward together towards global unity is not going to be all roses and yellow brick road, that it is going to be full of like conflict because that's what it means to get used to a new space, right? And that we shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid of being uncomfortable. We shouldn't be afraid of misspeaking and saying like, oh, I think I said that wrong. Okay, we're going to course correct. We shouldn't be afraid of like somebody saying something that maybe offers us the opportunity to course correct and to invite a dialogue about it. I think if there's one single thing that I think is affecting us as a society at large, and I think we can all agree we see it here in the U.S. as well, is there is like a little bit of a breaking down of our ability to actually have conversations with one another when we are in disagreements, right? So beautiful conversations when we all agree with one another, right? But there's only so much moving forward that we can do in that space, because the moving forward is not just for those of us who all agree, it's the moving forward of the totality of the human species. So we can't move forward and leave a certain part of us behind, because then we're not really moving forward. And the only way to really do that is to invite those uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, and to ask ourselves, when we're in a situation where maybe we are in disagreement, and when we feel maybe our emotions rising and we want to make things personal, or we want to label somebody as something because we just didn't like what they said, what am I protecting? What am I defending? Are you really protecting an ideology, or are you protecting something a little more egoic? And I think that, really for us to move forward all together, I think that needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be talked about a little bit more so. And I think, our younger generations coming in, are prepared to do that. They're prepared to fight. They're prepared to speak up. They're already prepared to say, hey, listen, this is not working for me. I'm blown away. Even just when I think about like work structure, how some of the younger generations, like, what, I don't want to live life like that. And for us, where, we lived like that, so I applaud the bravery there. And I just want to encourage those uncomfortable spaces, because it's those uncomfortable spaces that are the sparkle, that are the gem, and that are the things that are going to springboard our humanity to where we rightfully belong.
That was so eloquent and articulate. Didn't I tell you, Rick, that she's an amazing speaker? I suppose you must do that a lot, Mitzi. Do you do you do a lot of speaking engagements?
I've been doing more and more speaking engagements, but much of this is just sitting in spaces where we are conferencing with one another. We're talking about what is the future of our humanity, and in my own community circles that I also run as well, where I bring up some of these issues. But I definitely am looking forward to more speaking engagements where I can have dialogues like this. I think these dialogues are so important. You never know when a seed is going to be left. And the fact that these videos are available for people to see, on YouTube and Facebook, I think it's tremendous, because, I had the beautiful gift of reviewing some of the videos that were panels that were done 2 years ago. And even just 2 years ago, watching some of that stuff was just so inspiring to me, right? So
Yeah.
I think this is the space that really needs some impact. A lot of the work that you guys are doing, as well, about having these conversations to make sure that the people that are out there who need to hear this can.
So I was struck by a lot of how you were talking about the sensitive, being sensitive to the conversations and the interactions, because I'm very much involved with something called nonviolent communication. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
People do use that in mediation situations, but it's useful in terms of interactions with family, working people who work together, or different groups that come together. But without even saying that, it sounds like you're already on that wavelength to
Is that
be.
what you do with your company, Mitzi? Humanize?
Well, Humanize it has long been gone, but that was the initial
Oh,
inspiration. Yeah, that was the initial inspiration with that project. It really was to bridge systems, right? So the systems of technology, of apps, and of digital data, and how that could serve communities. One of the highlights of the project we had was
oh, I
working in
see.
Detroit,
Yeah.
to bring internet access back. And, a lot of that had to do with bringing solutions to them, but presenting it to them, not giving it to them like, hey, here's a solution, letting them be the leaders of it, right? So even in some of the business ventures that I've had the luck to be a part of, Humanize being one of them, way back when, really had a lot to do with just speaking to the community, knowing that the community had the answers, right? And all of our ancestral systems, I know the Andean Cosmovision is really key on this, is that when we really sit with ourselves and we really become in alignment with ourselves, we realize that we've had the answer all along and that we each possess the answer to our own healing, to our own transformation. And if we begin to pay attention to that a little bit more, so we place that in the hands of a community, then we're actually creating something together. And this is what I mean about us weaving together and walking forward together as equals, instead of looking at this is a marginalized community that needs my help. Even just how I'm phrasing that is saying like, oh, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help
Because
you.
you're so weak.
Exactly right. But if we begin to realize that both sides have something really important to bring to the table, that we're walking as equal, then we actually begin to see each other in a little bit of a different space, right? So again, removing the lens of what the economic disparity equals you're not doing something right, or you're, as you said, like the misnomer, you're lazy, or there's something wrong with you, right? Because a lot of indigenous communities, especially ones in South America who are super remote, don't care about money. For them, the aspect of economic justice is about having their land and being given the sovereignty to run their land as they see fit, because they are stewards of their land. Them doing that is not just benefiting them and their community, it's benefiting the entirety of the planet, because these forests need to be protected. The economic value of them being untouched serves humanity much greater than plowing those lands and putting cattle or mining it and then destroying those lands forever. I mean, that is a sound business case within itself.
It's just good business to have some long-term thinking, and long-term planning. So why wouldn't it be, a viable thought? It's just with different parts, different commodities. Yeah.
Yep.
So
So, Jana, you want to take us home for dinner?
it's dinner somewhere, right? Maybe happy hour too. Who knows?
Maybe.
Anyway, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much, Mitzi. I'm so glad we were able to have this opportunity with you. And I so wanted Rick to be able to meet you. And I think you've done a very good job of introducing yourself to Rick. So, and thank you all for watching this and for being a part of the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. Please go to we.net to get involved and even make a contribution if you want. Any gift, however small, is appreciated, and we thank you. Rick?
Yeah. And I agree. This has been a really inspiring discussion. Thank you for being part of 11 Days of Global Unity, the 20th anniversary summit. And it's all about we, right? So let's go from being a me society, this is like the M, to a we society, the W. And that's why we launched we.net. So together we can create a world that works for all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyay.
Thank you.
Thank you.